welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez on trial for their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez. We are on the defense's case, part 13. We are just going to dive right into it. So we left off with a bunch of arguments, and then we had the forensic pathologist, Dr. Cyril Wecht, come on. He was on the stand for a brief period, and then we went into more arguments. Now Cyril Wecht is going to be held off. The rest of his testimony is going to be held off until the following court week. Right now, we're on Wednesday, November 29th. Because arguments, if you remember, they went from Monday into Tuesday. So here we are with, we're going to just start off Wednesday morning, November 29th, 1995. Please hit the like button. And let's get started. So the following proceedings were held in open court out of the presence of the jury. So the court says everyone is here without the jury. Yes. Ms. Abramson says, I just wanted to mark some items of evidence before the jury comes out. The court may recall yesterday we were looking for a particular item of evidence that was taken from the scene that we couldn't find. Detective Zoller has now brought into court. It's a piece of the white bracelet at the scene. It was identified as item 16. I'd like to mark it part of 48, which is, I guess this wasn't in evidence. This is the piece that they were missing. So now they're going to add it into evidence. Detective Zoller brought it in. I'd like to make it part of 48, which is all of the other things collected from the scene, and next in order on 48, Your Honor, would be 48T, as in Tom. Court says, okay, we'll make it 48T. Also, Your Honor, Ms. Abramson continues, I'd like to mark next in order what was Exhibit 44 in the previous trial, and I think that would be 324 now. The court says, yes. And it was, what number again? Miss Abramson says, 44, Your Honor. And what was it? Miss Abramson says, it's a shot pattern, a shotgun round pattern chart that was used with Deputy Van Horn's testimony in the first trial. The court says, okay. All right. As soon as you're all set, let me know and we'll have the jury out. Miss Abramson says, I'm all set, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'd ask that we take a recess in 1 hour. The court says, okay. Ms. Abramson says, thank you. The jury enters the courtroom and the following proceedings are held. I'm going to, FYI, I'm just going to go cameraless because I'm having a bad hip pain day today. So it's hurting to sit up, and so I'm just going to, it's easier if I go cameraless. Otherwise, I'm like, I have to like lay down basically, and then like you're just gonna get like this much of my head. So it's just easier to take the camera off. So sorry, it just is what it is. All right, so let's continue. So our witness today is, I forgot to mention, on the thumbnail you can see him, Deputy Dwight Van Horn. He's with the, I believe, LA or Beverly Hills Police Department, I think. And well, we'll find out. And he's a firearms examiner, so he is the expert. He was an expert for the prosecution in the first trial. So in this trial, he is testifying for the defense, which is obviously something different, and that is something that we'll see how his testimony might change or shape some of the defense's strategy here. So let's dive into it. The court says the jurors are in the jury box. Good morning. Nice to see you all. And we're now ready to resume with the trials, and the defense may call its next witness. Ms. Abramson says, "Thank you, Your Honor. We called Deputy Dwight Van Horn. He was sworn in and testifies as follows." The clerk swears him in there. Okay, direct examination begins. "Deputy Van Horn, by whom are you employed?" "The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department." Sorry, not Beverly Hills. Los Angeles County. I was not sure which it was. So I knew it was LA County or Beverly Hills. All right, so he's with LA County. "And what is your particular assignment within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department?" "I'm assigned to the Detectives Division Crime Lab as a firearms examiner in the crime lab." Basically, what does a firearms examiner do? The basics of what a firearms examiner does generally is to determine if a bullet or cartridge case or some other ammunition component was fired in or from a particular firearm. Additionally, a firearms examiner is tasked with knowing as much about firearms and ammunition that he can so that he can answer questions that relate to criminal cases, both to help in an investigation and explain things in a court of law. That was a nice, concise way of explaining what he does. Made sense. In addition to familiarity with firearms and ammunition, is a firearms examiner required to know how guns work, how ammunition works, what happens when certain kinds of ammunition are fired, and certain kinds of firearms? Yes. "And how long have you been assigned to the Detective Division, Scientific Services Bureau, Firearms Identification Section?" "In excess of 10 years." "And how many different divisions are there in basically the crime lab for the LA County Sheriff's Department?" "We have the firearms section, the question document section, serology, blood, alcohol, narcotics, toxicology, the latent print section, and the physical evidence section, and a photography lab." "Are you, in addition to being a firearms examiner, a sworn deputy sheriff, a peace officer?" "Yes, I am." "And prior to becoming a firearms identification or firearms examiner, if you will, did you serve more ordinary duties as a deputy sheriff?" "Yes." "Did you go through the same sheriff's academy training as all other deputy sheriffs, including the ones in this courtroom?" "Yes, I did." "Did you serve a tour of duty on patrol?" "Yes, I did." "What other tasks did you have in the sheriff's department before you became a firearms examiner?" "In addition to also working the custody division, I worked for the sheriff's department as a firearms instructor for just under 2 years." "What does a firearms instructor do?" Basically, a firearms instructor on a sheriff's department teaches the basics of marksmanship to all levels of law enforcement officers, not only from the sheriff's department, but all the other agents who use our facilities and our academy. And in addition to teaching the basics of marksmanship, we also teach the same group of officers how to become familiar with and safely handle firearms that they come in contact with during their duties as peace officers so that those firearms can be safely transported through the evidence system. Now, you mentioned that there are other agencies besides the Sheriff's Department that you, as an instructor, whose members you, as an instructor, were teaching. Does the Sheriff's Department have contractual relationships with other police agencies inside the county of Los Angeles? Yes. And does the Sheriff's Department provide, on a contractual basis, certain services to smaller police agencies that they don't have the means or the facilities to provide for themselves? Yes. And is the crime lab and the firearms identification section one of those areas of the sheriff's department where services are provided outside the sheriff's for outside agencies? Yes. And to whom, I don't mean list every one, but what kinds of other organizations does the Sheriff's Department have contractual arrangements with to provide various services? Well, basically, the Sheriff's Department provides crime lab services to every other law enforcement agency in the county of Los Angeles, with the exception of the Los Angeles Police Department, who have their own crime lab. So, all the smaller cities and separately incorporated areas can utilize the Sheriff's Crime Lab in investigating their cases? Yes. Now, as a firearms examiner, have you worked on, strike that, the Sheriff's Department itself investigates its own cases in the area of the county where it has original jurisdiction? That's correct. So, as a firearms examiner for the Sheriff's Department, I take it you work on a number of cases that are being investigated by the Sheriff's Department. Yes. And in addition to that, you do firearms examinations for other police departments? Yes. Is there any contractual agreement with the Sheriff's Department to do work for any criminal defense organizations? Not a contractual agreement that I'm aware of, no. And for the Sheriff's Department, now strike that. However, if the Sheriff's Department has done investigation work and crime lab work on a particular case, are the sheriff's deputies who have performed that work and the civilian sheriff's personnel who have performed that work available by subpoena to either side in a lawsuit? Yes. And at some point, Deputy Van Horn, did you become involved by performing certain examinations in this case? Yes. And at whose request did you begin your examinations in this case? Originally, it was by Deputy District Attorney Pamela Bazanich. Ooh, remember her? She was so obnoxious in the first trial. Yeah, she was the lead prosecutor in the first trial. And was it your understanding that Ms. Bazanich was lead counsel for the prosecution in the case through the first trial? Yes. And do you have a recollection of when it was that the district attorney, Pamela Bazanich, contacted you? I have a report, and it would be sometime prior to when I issued the report. Is it all right to check that, Your Honor? The court says, yes, go ahead. The witness says, thank you. I wrote a report on July 16th, 1993, so it would be sometime prior to that date. Exactly, I couldn't tell you. Ms. Abramson says, and what was it that you were asked to do when you were contacted by the district attorney in this case? To examine pieces of evidence that had been recovered from the scene. And as you've indicated, you issued a report listing your findings on July 16th, 1993? Yes. And did that report indicate that you received evidence to examine from the Beverly Hills Police Department, in fact, from Detective Zoller on July 6th, 1993? Yes. And were you eventually called as a witness by the district attorneys in the first trial? Yes. Now, what training have you received that qualifies you as a firearms examiner? So, my question is, wouldn't it be interesting why the prosecution didn't call him in this trial, but he's being called in the second trial by the defense because he must have something that is helpful to the defense. So what could it be? Let's see. Um, and I wonder why the prosecution if did they change course in their strategy this time around because now they knew that the defense was going with a self-defense theory. Not really sure, but all right. So next question. Now, what training have you received that qualifies you as a firearms examiner? My training at the range was basically the prerequisite that led to me being selected to work in the firearm selection. While there, I completed a 2-year training course that was conducted by 5 other members of the firearms identification section who had in excess of 40 years' experience in the field of firearms identification. During that time, I read and became familiar with most of the leading periodicals and publications that relate to the field of firearms examination or identification. I've had the opportunity to tour and attend study groups with most of the leading manufacturers of ammunition and firearms that are located here on the West Coast. I've also been back to the Federal Bureau of Investigation at their headquarters in Quantico, Virginia, for a 2 week for two 1 week courses that pertain to the field of firearms identification. And during the course of my duties, I've test fired in excess of 6,000 firearms, made more than 10,000 ballistics comparisons, and I've testified as a firearms expert on about 285 prior occasions in federal, superior, and municipal courts. Before you became a firearms investigator, even in the sheriff's department, did you consider yourself a gun hobbyist? Yes. Are you someone who has been familiar with guns over a long span of your life? Basically, since I became a peace officer, yes. Were you also in the military, by the way, before you were in the sheriff's department? Yes, I was. Were you a police officer in the military as well? Yes, I was. You've indicated that in acquiring your expertise as a firearm examiner, you read and were familiar with various periodicals and publications. Is there a difference between the kinds of periodicals and publications that are available or in widespread dissemination among amateurs who are hobbyists in gun work versus what professional firearms examiners and firearms identification people are exposed to and rely on? Yes. And what are they? If you could tell us in your own experience of that point when you changed from being a gun hobbyist to being a gun expert? Well, most people who have a passing interest or even maybe an active interest in firearms generally will get their information from either other hobbyists or from gun magazines. And that would fit the what I was even at the time I worked at the range, as you get most of your information from magazines such as guns and ammo and shooting times and things that are available on the newsstand. And you come to rely on what you read in the magazines as gospel. But when you turn to this as a full-time job, you realize that magazines generally are made to sell magazines, and the information contained therein is not always the most accurate. So, to build upon your foundation to be able to do this type of work, you need to read textbooks that are geared to this type of topic. And also, you read a journal that's published by the Association of Firearm and Tool Marks Examiners, which is a professional organization of people who are firearms examiners. And in that journal, they share work that they have done, odd things that they have seen in the course of their duties, and that at that point becomes the source of your new information. And are you still learning new information routinely about firearms and firearm ammunition by being exposed to professional organizations and these kinds of texts and articles? Yes. And part of that, in fairness to the magazines, part of that education does come from the magazine, because oftentimes you'll find out what's coming in new into the firearms industry, both in the way of firearms and ammunition. Generally, that will be in magazines some months before it's available for sale. And generally, the way things work, if, say, for instance, something became available in October, we might not see it until sometime after January, but yet the magazines might have an article about it in July. So it kind of gives us a heads up of what the firearms industry is getting ready to throw at us. When you say getting ready to throw at you, what do you mean? Well, it's a continuing education process because the manufacturers of both firearms and ammunition are constantly coming out with new products, improved products, and it's our job to keep up with that. And it's your job to keep up on that so that you can identify in an investigative capacity what gun or guns are used in criminal activity. Isn't that basically what you're trying to do? Yes, it is. Does the Sheriff's Department make an effort to obtain for its firearms identification section in the crime lab all the available ammunition and examples of new kinds of firearms as they're coming out. In a way, yes. Okay. Could you describe what they do in that regard? Well, at our lab, we have just shy of 5,000 firearms, and these firearms are recovered from the property section after they have been ordered, ordered destroyed by the court. And we regularly go to the property section and retrieve firearms from that are slated for destruction that we don't have in our possession, so that we have working examples of all different firearms that are available. So firearms that are ordered to be destroyed by the court can be used or utilized by firearms examiners, with the county or whoever who who can come in and, maybe order it on auction or um, somehow purchase it. We also have a large reference library of ammunition, and we get our ammunition the same way by going to property and culling from the ammunition or property that which we don't have, so we can have examples at the lab. And this is so that the taxpayers don't have to find you're going out to the gun manufacturers and buying new ones for the test purposes. That's correct. And do you find that the sheriff's laboratory that it doesn't take long after a new gun is out there before someone's arrested with one and it's seized and eventually you get it? That would be a fair statement. Are you a member of this professional association you mentioned, the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners? Yes. And in addition to publishing a journal, do they serve an educational function? Yes, both through the journal and also they have a weekly, or excuse me, a yearly meeting that lasts for a week that consists of training. And do various experts teach at these seminars and bring people up to date on the latest knowledge about firearms and ammunition and ballistics issues? Yes. And have you been an active member in that organization? Yes. Have you served on various committees? Yes. Are you familiar with Dr. Martin Fackler? Yes. And has that organization been the vehicle that brought the two of you together? Yes, it is. And is Dr. Fackler recognized as the leading wound ballistics expert in the United States? Yes. Now, did you have available, or was it made available to you, a report prepared by Failure Analysis Associates concerning the crime scene in this case? Yes. And have you also made, have you also had made available to the testimony of Dr. Roger McCarthy? Yes. And if I could focus you to testimony that was offered by Dr. McCarthy concerning shotgun ammunition. Do you have that testimony in mind? Yes. And was Dr. McCarthy's testimony about shotgun ammunition scientifically accurate? No. He just flat out says, nope, no, it wasn't. And could you tell us what respects his testimony was in? Sorry, let me try that again. Can you tell us in what respects his testimony was inaccurate? Objection calls for narrative. The court says, well, it certainly has that potential. Perhaps you can focus it a little bit. Ms. Abramson says, let's talk about, first of all, the way that he describes the components of a round of shotgun ammunition. Were there errors in his description for that? Yes. Why don't we do this, Deputy Van Horn? Why don't you describe for the jury, first of all, how many different basic types, generally speaking, of shotgun ammunition are there? A lot. It's a lot. A lot. At one time, there were thousands of different combinations of shot shell ammunition available. I think that it's been pared down to, I'll try and zero in on one manufacturer because essentially all the manufacturers produce one thing, to where they used to produce ammunition within a where they used to produce literally thousands of different variations of shotgun ammunitions within a manufacturer. They're probably now down to probably 250, 300 possible combinations that are available for sale. Is there a general difference between what's called birdshot sized ammunition or birdshot sized pellets and buckshot sized pellets? Yes. And by the way, is there now, or to the best of your knowledge, has there ever been a size 8.5 birdshot, as Dr. McCarthy testified? Well, there is a 8.5 shot, but once again, we have an ammunition collection that we've had for in excess of 40 years, and we have no example of that. We have never heard or never had 8.5 shot on a case. I've checked with other labs, they've never had 8.5 shot on a case. I've checked with manufacturers, an 8.5 shot is produced primarily as a target load, and it's not a very popular load of shotgun ammunition. So it isn't anything that actually is available. Is that what you're saying? Objection leading. Court says, well, it perhaps rephrase the question. Ms. Abramson says, is it available? Yes. And for sale? Yes. Where? According to Federal Ammunition Company, it's what they consider a target load and mainly sold to teams that go out and shoot trap and skeet events. So it's not even used for like hunting, or you can't even buy it commercially really. I mean, you can, but it's a special niche. So could you pick it up at your local Big Five? I've never seen it. So you've never even seen it? No, ma'am. Is that a likely sized ammunition to have been used based on your experience in a person to person shooting? Objection calls for speculation, no foundation. The court overrules that. The witness says no. Miss Abramson says, now, is there a 7.5 load of birdshot? Yes. Is that commonly sold here in Los Angeles County and Southern California? Yes. Is there an 8 load of birdshot? Yes. And is that also available in gun stores in Southern California? Yes. Now, are there different sizes of, there are other sizes of birdshot besides this 7.5 and the 8 that we've just mentioned, correct? Yes, there are. How many other sizes do you know? It actually goes down as small as 12, which is usually loaded in handgun calibers that are designed to shoot shot cartridges for pests, snakes, or rats, or something like that. And then it would go 12, 9, 8, 7.5, 7, 6, 5, 4, and then to get into what's called B sizes, there's B and BB. And then there's a few other sizes. And then you get into buckshot. And the smaller the number, the larger the shot. It's exactly the opposite of what you would think. So if you're talking about a number 7.5 shot and a number 4 shot, 4 shots bigger than a half, a 7.5. A 4 shot is bigger than a 7.5. Is number 4 a bird shot or a buckshot? Well, there's number 4 birdshot and number 4 buckshot. Well, that's confusing. Yes, it is. Do you know the difference in size between a number 4 birdshot and a number 4 buckshot? In in thousandths of an inch, excuse me, in hundredths of an inch, number 4 would be 0.13. So it would be 13 hundredths of an inch. And in number 4 buck, that would be 0.24 or 24 hundredths of an inch. So almost double in size for the buckshot versus birdshot. Just about, yes. With respect to number 4 buckshot, based on your experience, how generally is number 4 buckshot packaged? You mean within the shot shell? Within the shot shell. Buckshot is loaded to pellet count. Bird shot is loaded to weight. Buckshot is loaded to pellet count. So, Dr. McCarthy with his, well, the pellets could range anywhere from 25 to 30, whatever. I'm just making crap up. No, they're actually always, I think, what is it, like 27 or something? So he says buckshot is loaded to the count of the pellets, the number of pellets. So it's going to be precise every time. Birdshot is loaded by weight. So that might vary slightly. Those might vary, by one or two, probably only like one pellet, give or take, one way. But the buckshot is always going to be loaded to a specific count. This is important. This is an important fact, so I just wanted to highlight that. All right. And are the interior components of various number 4 shot shells, can they vary from type to type even within the same brand? In other words, the manufacturers package it internally in different ways? Yes. And what are the different ways that that number 4 buckshot is packaged, to the best of your knowledge? There's basically 3 ways. The first way would be where the buckshot pellets are loaded directly into the shot shell. Then the next day would be, or the next way, sorry, the next way would be the buckshot pellets are loaded directly into the shot shell along with the plastic filler material. That's usually either polyethylene or styrene, and that buffer materials fills up the airspace that would be between the pellets as they stick inside the shot shell. Actually, there's two more ways. The other way would be to load the pellets in a shot cup. We've heard a lot about shot cups and watts. So, shot cup, you load the pellets into the shot cup, which would be inside the shot shell, and then the pellets would be inside the shot cup, which would be a liner on the inside of the shot shell. And then the last way is to load the pellets into the shot cup and add the polystyrene or polyethylene filler material. Now, this filler material is also called granular buffer. Yes, it could be called that, yes. And to the best of your knowledge, does the Fiat Manufacturing Company use granular buffer in their number 4 shot? Some of it. And do you know if they use buffer when they use a shot cup? I don't believe so. In your examination of the ammunition, in this case, did you make a determination of how the buckshot rounds in this case were packed? What the internal construction, if you will, of those shot shells was? Yes, generally, it would be the internal components starting all the way at the bottom of the shot shell would be the gunpowder. Then immediately on top of the gunpowder is a small plastic disc that's called an overpowder wad. Immediately on top of the overpowder wad is a pressed paper or fiber wad that's called either a spacer or a filler wad. And then the buckshot placed on top of the spacer wad. And then everything is contained in putting a crimp on the top of the shot shell. And is this, is that plastic disc that you have described as an overpowder wad, is that ever called a power piston? Only if it's made by Remington. That's a patented or copyrighted name that they have for a wad. We've heard it referred to that before. I can't remember who referred to it as that, but um, that's good to know. That's only for Remington ammo. And to the best of your, well, strike that. Based on your opinion, was the ammunition used here Remington? No. So is the plastic disc that appeared in the ballistics evidence here properly called an overpowder wad and not a power piston? Yes. And is there still new shotgun ammunition manufactured where there is a paper wad at the very top of the column above the buckshot? Not certainly. And how long has it been since ammunition of that configuration has been manufactured? A long time, probably in excess of 20 years. Was that one area of Dr. McCarthy's testimony that you noted to be inaccurate? Objection leading. Rephrase the question. Ms. Abramson says, was there an area of Dr. McCarthy's testimony concerning the way shot shells are packaged that was inaccurate? I believe so. And what was that? When he refers to an overshot wad, he basically, my bone of contention there was that somebody who's familiar with the components of shot shells should be able to easily tell the difference between an overshot wad and an over powder wad. So remember how Dr. McCarthy was testifying totally outside of his scope of expertise yet again. So he's not a ballistics expert, but yet he was testifying as to the ballistics and talking about the making of and the insides of the pellets. And here, obviously, he shouldn't have been testifying to that because this witness says totally otherwise. And he says that shells should be able to easily um, anyone who's familiar with the components of shotgun shells should be easily able to tell the difference between an overshot wad and an over powder wad. They're totally different in construction. So, Dr. McCarthy discredited once again. And in his testimony, did he appear to be commingling the two? Objection leading and argumentative. The court says, well, it does call for a conclusion on the part of the witness. Ms. Abramson says, he read the testimony, Your Honor. The court says, ask him to characterize it. All right. Can you characterize what Dr. McCarthy's testimony, how he was dealing with those two different components? Yes. From reading the testimony, it doesn't appear that he knew that there was a difference between the two. Objection calls for speculation and argumentative. Sustained. The answer stricken. Are you serious? You asked him to characterize it. He characterized it, and then you're like, nah, that's not good enough. I just strike that from the record. Did his testimony appear to confuse the two? Objection calls for speculation and argumentative. Sustained. In reading Dr. McCarthy's testimony, did he characterize something as an overshot wad that is actually an overpowder wad? Yes. Now, you testified a few months ago that buckshot is loaded by the manufacturer to pellet count. That's correct. You're familiar with the pellet count of number 4 Fiachi buckshot, correct? Yes. What's that count? Standard load would be 27 pellets. And how many? Well, first of all, have you yourself opened up rounds of shotgun ammunition that were loaded to pellet count? Yes. And how many such rounds have you personally examined by opening them? Just number 4 buckshot, or are you talking about all buckshot? Well, let's start with number 4. Probably more than 100. And are you familiar with the work that other firearms examiners at the Sheriff's Department have done? Yes. Do they routinely open up shotgun ammunition as well? Yes. And are you familiar with the fact that they've opened up hundreds of rounds as well? Yes. Have you ever heard of a shotgun shell that was loaded, of number 4, that was loaded with more than 27 when 27 was supposed to be the count? No. So, again, Dr. McCarthy discredited. Is there something in the design and construction of number 4 shotgun ammunition that makes it impossible to load more than 27 in the standard sized round? I don't know if I'd want to use the word as strong as impossible, but it would make it, to me, very unlikely. And what is that makes it very unlikely that it could have more than 27 pellets it's supposed to have? Well, when you place a buckshot in a shotgun shell, it's naturally stacks inside the shell based upon how many or the size of the pellets that you're placing in there. For instance, with double aught buck, there are approximately 33 caliber, and when you place double aught buck pellets into a shot shell, 3 will go in the bottom and they'll sit there and look like a little triangle, and the next 3 will go in there and they'll sit in the spaces that are not occupied by the spaces from the bottom 3, so they stack. So if you look at them from the side, you'd see, for instance, you'd see one pellet here and then another pellet here and another pellet here. They stack, but obviously they're round, so they can't stack directly on top of one another. So they settle into the recesses made upon the stack on the bottom. And basically, all buckshot stack pellets are much smaller and they don't stack in the same manner. So birdshot pellets, you mean? Yes, I'm sorry. Could you draw an illustration of this stacking? Well, before you do that, is there a way that number 4 buckshot stacks? Yes. And can you describe that? There's 27 pellets stacked in such a way that your first layer, if you will, has 6 pellets around the inside circumference of the shot shell. And then a 7th pellet ends up in the space in between those 6 pellets because obviously, they don't fill up the interior space. So the 6 of them sit there, and the 7th pellet sits down in the little defect or area left behind the 6, but the area is not big enough for the pellet to go all the way down to sit and rest on the wad, so it sits up a little bit. So now, when the second stack goes in there, it stacks in the same way. Now they have something to bounce off of, and they will go to the outside of the shot shells again. And then that 7th one for the second layer, once again, sits on top. You have 3 layers of 7, and their goal is to get 27 pellets in there, because now if that fourth row, if you have a pellet sitting in the center of that fourth row, then the shell is crimped. The crimp needs a place for the material to go down into, so it goes down into the void that's left there. That 27th pellet from the fourth layer would go. So if I understand this, you have the first layer has 7 pellets, the second has 7 for 14, the third has 7 for 21, but the fourth layer can only take 6. Well, I'm not going to say it could only take 6, but I've never seen it take, I've never taken one apart that had more than 27 pellets. So you've taken apart more than 2 or 3? Yes. And what do you think is the likelihood if one were to take apart, say, even 10, that within that count of 10, you would find 3 or 4 that are off count? Based upon my experience, I'd say it's unlikely. So that was a big fat lie by Dr. McCarthy. Because Dr. McCarthy only took apart a few, and he found different counts for different shotgun shells, supposedly. So the last row would be 6 because the plastic material that crimps in is depressed in the center. Is that correct? That's correct. If that 7th pellet were 3, I'm sorry, if that 7th pellet were on the top layer there, the crimping machine wouldn't be able to do that star crimp on the top. Well, once again, I'm not positive that that's true because I don't know that the amount of force that's used. It's possible that the 28th pellet could be loaded in there, but I've never seen it. And you've never heard of anybody else in firearms seeing it either? No. In 10 years? No. Now, could you draw that illustration of what we were talking about? Could you do a cross section of the stacking of number 4? Easiest way to do this is taking the sheet off and stick it to the board. I'd like Your Honor to mark this 325. The court says 325, so he just took a big post-it note is what I'm guessing, like a big post-it note from an easel, and put it up on the wall. Ms. Abramson says, and we have different colored markers. The witness says, I'm not much of an artist, but this would be the sixth pellets that would lay on the bottom, and the seventh would fill in the space. If it looked, if you looked at this from the side, it would look like this, and this would be the two pellets that would face you. This would be the next two. There's two in the back, and the seventh pellet sits down on the top of here. But the space between them is less than 24 caliber, so this seventh pellet will not sit down on the same plane as the other pellets. Ms. Aronson says, before you resume your seat, could you, while you're there, draw a cross section of how Fiachi number 4 buckshot, the Fiachi number 4 buckshot that was used in this case, is loaded in the shot shell? Could you draw it a little bigger than that? The court says, maybe you can give him a different type of pen. Ms. Aronson says, yeah, a bigger marker. Those are small. Hopefully it has ink. The witness says, okay, the outside line here is the shotgun shell. This is the web of the shot shell. This is where the gunpowder would be, and this represents the hole where the primer would come through and ignite the gunpowder. The first wad that Fiachi uses is a small plastic disc, so this overpowder wad is probably about a quarter of an inch thick or so. Would be the first thing that's over top of the gunpowder. And basically, the purpose of that is to keep the gunpowder down at the back of the shot shell so that when the primer is ignited, it can ignite all the powder. So if you didn't have these wads here, the gunpowder would be free to go all over the shot shell. The next item that you see would be a spacer wad, and bear in mind that this is a 12 gauge shotgun shell or a shotgun shell. So, conceivably, it could be loaded with anything from the smallest buckshot to and including the largest buckshot. So the size of the spacer wad is going to depend on the amount of shot that's placed in the top portion here. I didn't, what this arrow means is we start with pellets at the bottom, and the pellets would be filled up to where the star crimp is. I didn't want to draw all those pellets in there. So this spacer wad, depending on how many shot shells, or excuse me, shot pellets are going to be in here, could be varying in thickness, but once they determine how much space they have to take up here to get the buckshot or the bird shot, whatever the case may be, all the way up to the crimp, that determines the width of the spacer wad or whether they might use one or more spacer wads. The court asks, are the shells themselves always the same size regardless of the size of the shot? The witness says, well, they could be. Generally, the standard length now is 2 3/4 inch shells, and they currently now go up to 3.5. And the most common are 2 3/4 and 3 inch shells, and that's measured after if you measured the shot shell that was marked 2 3/4 and it was loaded like that, at this point it would measure about 2 1/4 inches. But when the shot shell is fired and then that star crimp is straightened out, if you measured the shot shell at that point, that's where you get the 2 3/4 inches. The court says, I just mean as you receive it unfired in a box of ammunition, would the size of the shell be the same regardless of the size of the shot that's within it? The witness says, yes, they'd all be loaded to the length 2 3/4 or 3, whatever was marked on the box. Ms. Abramson says, you've indicated that you examined ballistics evidence in this case. What was the purpose of that examination that you made back in July of 93? To see if a manufacturer could be determined, and also to see what the sizes of the pellets were in this case. And were you also asked to determine whether you could tell by examining the ballistics evidence that was collected from the scene whether a certain at least minimum number of rounds had been fired? Yes. And I'm just showing you this envelope that in this trial has been marked 48. The last time you testified about it, it was called Exhibit 16. I'll just ask you if this contains the ballistics evidence that you have previously examined in this case. Yes, it does. And within these envelopes of evidence, did you identify, for example, this one, which is now called 48E, items that appear to be, for example, the spacer, the paper spacer wad that you have drawn on 325? Yes. And did you observe in other envelopes there, as part of 48, the plastic over powder pads, as you've identified that in 325? Yes. Did you see a number of pellets of basically two different sizes? Yes. And did you make a determination of what sizes the pellets were that you saw? Yes. What sizes did you determine that they were? The one size was number 4 buckshot, and the other size could have been either number 6 or 7.5 shot. Birdshot? Birdshot. And were you able to determine that the number 4 buckshot that you saw had affiliated with it the components of a shell loaded precisely the way you've drawn that in 325? In other words, with the plastic over powder wad, a paper spacer wad, and then individual pellets? Yes. Now, there's also a way of packing shotgun ammunition as you've described inside a shot cup. Yes. And if it was in a shot cup, you wouldn't expect to find spacer wads or little plastic overpowder wads, would you? Well, generally, the way shot cups are used now, they're the topmost portion of a shot column, wad, or wad column. So generally, I would expect to see a shot cup that would be integral with a spacer wad and overpowder wad. In other words, it would all be one piece? That's correct. And all plastic? Yes. So when you saw that what you had been what had been gathered at the scene here consisted of small plastic discs and plastic spacer wads, did that lead you to conclude that the number 4 buck in this case was packed as the way that you have drawn rather than in the one piece shot cup? The witness says yes. Now, did you also examine two items of ballistics evidence that did consist of one solid plastic shot cup with integral spacer part, integral overpowder part? Yes. Did you determine that those two shot cups had been packed with the bird shot pellets that you found? Yes. Now I want to show you what's previously been marked 313. This is a box of live ammunition. I just want to put these aside for a moment. You've seen this bag and this box of ammunition before, have you not? Yes, I have. Did you, in fact, take custody of it and bring it into this building? Take over custody from the public defender investigator? Yes. Because the sheriff's department has to bring all ammunition into the building? Yes. I would ask you, did you bring with you a tool that you routinely use to open up shot shells? Yes. Okay, I would like you to open one of these, and I would like to get an envelope from the clerk. In fact, you can pick whichever one you like. I won't pick one. I'll put this back. Take any one you want. And I want to get, the court says, why don't you put it on this paper? The witness says, I'm sorry. The court says, put it on this paper so it doesn't get all over. Miss Abramson says, yes, I have 3 different envelopes because what we'd like to do is get the gunpowder out separately and then the pellets until we get a plastic envelope. The witness says, so you want me to do that now? Miss Abramson says, yes. Now you're cutting across. He says, yes. Why don't you describe what you're doing? Using this tool that's designed to cut shotgun shells open, it's now, made its penetration into the shot shell, and you just turn it around and cut through. And when you remove it, it generally cuts it in the vicinity of the spacer wad and the overpowder wad and the gunpowder are still contained in here. So, great. Did she? And then she asks, Miss Amerson says, broke the spacer wad? I don't have my knife. Wait a minute. Okay, removing the spacer wad, which is now in two pieces, and the pellets. Do you want me to count those? Oh, you can. Go ahead. This will be very embarrassing if there weren't 27 in there. I'll rest my case and go home. 22, 24, and 27. She says, thank you. Apart from that, does the configuration of the spacer wad, well, strike that. This split when you were opening it. But have you, over the years, come upon spacer wads that sort of wind up sliced across sectionally after they've been fired? Yes. And do they tend to come apart into smaller little discs? They can. And in fact, within the evidence envelopes that are still in front of you, the evidence actually from the scene, are there some parts of spacer wads that appear to be cross sections similar to the one that you cut? Yes. And are there some that appear to be actually the whole thing? Yes. And still within the cup is the over powder wad that you described, and does that appear to be identical to the plastic over powder wads that were collected by the Beverly Hills Police Department at the scene here? Yes. So, does it appear, having now looked at all the component parts of this number 4 Fiat, that the component parts of this number 4 Fiat from the box appear to be identical to the component parts that were located at the scene here? Yes. And in looking over the component parts of the shotgun ammunition that were taken from the scene, did you make an assessment as to how many rounds you could say, with some degree of certainty, of number 4 buckshot were fired? At least, not total rounds, but how many fired rounds is there ballistic evidence accounting for them? In the number 4 buck? In the number 4 buck. There were 6 overpowder wads, so I would say a minimum of 6 rounds of buckshot there fired. And were there spacer wads found as well? Yes. And from examining those, did you conclude that there may have been 8 fired? No. Okay, so 6 is all you can say with certainty. Correct. Of the double of the number 4 buckshot. And there were uh and then there were 2 shot cups that were found, shot cups that had held birdshot. Yes. And so, did you count each of those as a separate round that was fired? Yes. Is that where I'm getting the 8 from? Yes. So, from the ballistics evidence, what you can say is that 8 rounds for certain were fired, possibly more, where there's no evidence to account for them. Would that be fair to say? That's a possibility, yes. Miss Emerson says, Your Honor, move I'm going to move on to the gun. So this would be, the court says, okay, we'll take our recess. We'll resume at 20 minutes to the hour. Don't discuss the matter with anyone or form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 20 minutes too. So we ourselves will recess here and we will come back and continue what's his face's testimony. My hips hurt so bad. I'm sorry, I can't think. This is Dr. Who are we talking about? No, Deputy Deputy Dwight Van Horn. So far, like, he's a really good witness so far for the defense. I mean, he's doing a lot of background information regarding ballistics and firearms and stuff, but he's making it very understandable. He's making it easy to understand. He doesn't run on and on and on in his answers. So far I'm liking him as a witness, and interesting, he was a state's witness before this, and now he is doing a really good job for the defense, I think. So, what do you guys think about his testimony so far? Let me know in the comments below, and we will continue his testimony tomorrow. Thanks, guys, so much for watching. Take care. Bye now.